Hey, David Rathoff here. My previous few videos, I've been talking a little bit about testing and refactoring, and just kind of what the benefits of that are, and what that looks like, why you would want to do it. In this video, I thought I would actually just maybe jump in and show you what that looks like in action and what that kind of workflow looks like. So I'll be using Ruby as an example just because it's probably the quickest thing for me to do this with, but the ideas, the concepts here will apply to any language that you're using, and it just happens to be that I can get this up and running really quickly with Ruby. So first thing I'm going to do is just show you what this looks like in action, and then we'll go through the steps to actually get it up and running. So let me shrink this down here. So now you should be able to see on the left here, I have an editor up. And in that, I just have a, this is a Ruby class. Don't worry too much about the details of what's going on here. But basically, we should be able to ask for, to create instances of a giant robot. And we should be able to pass in a name with that. And then we should be able to ask our instance of a giant robot for its name. So if we look on the right, you can see I've got some specs running over here, and we can see at the moment there are 2 examples and no failures, and there's some additional information here, like it's showing how long it took to run those tests, and these dots just indicate for each of those examples that they're passing, and the actual specs for that are right here. And all they're really doing are saying, hey, go get that giant robot class, and saying, hey, we're interested in testing this giant robot class. We want to know that when we try to get a new instance of that class, we don't get any errors. That basically lets us know that that file exists with the definition of that class. And then we're also letting it know that we have a name method that we're interested in, that we want to test. This is just the standard way to describe this in RSpec with this pound in front of it that says it's an instance method. And then we're saying the thing that we're talking about is a new instance of, the subject is the name of a new instance of giant robot with the name David being passed in when it's initialized. So down below, we just have another test. This is our second test that says that name is expected to equal David, because that's what we're passing in. So the other cool thing that's going on in the background here is anytime we make a change to either this class or to our specs over here, we should see the test run. So if I wanted to just prove that this can fail, let's just pass in Dave instead of David and save it, and we should see 1 failure. And it's telling us that this is really handy because it's saying, hey, you have this test saying that in this situation the name should equal David, and it's failing. It's expecting David, and it's getting Dave. So you can imagine if you had like 100 specs or something, or hundreds or thousands of specs, and you make a change somewhere and something fails unexpectedly somewhere else. It's nice to see exactly what's failing, what it was expecting, and what it actually got. So a really handy tool, and you notice that was really fast to run as well. And just to show the other side of it, if I was to save this file, same thing's going to happen. It's going to automatically run it. And that's nice because if we're making changes in the actual class and we save, we can see whether or not the specs are still passing. So that's a general setup. I'm going to run through how to get this all going with Ruby and RSpec. RSpec is the tool for writing the tests. And then guard, and guard is what'll watch the file system for file saving and automatically run the specs over here when that happens. So let's just close this out here for now. So I'll close that, and we'll just worry about this window for a second. So we don't need to run these anymore. Okay. So I can make a new directory called RSpec setup. We'll go in there. And you'll notice that we have nothing, so we're just kind of starting from scratch here. And I'll go ahead and you could use whatever editor you want. I'm just going to use Atom here. And the way we're going to install these things is by relying on a gem file and bundler. And a gem file just is a way to let bundler know what the dependencies are for your project. And you can, in order to take advantage of that, you can just make a gem file. And there's no extension on that, it's just gem file. And the first thing you do with every gem file is tell it where to look for gems. And gems are kind of like little libraries, essentially. So we're saying, hey, this is when we run bundler and we're going to get our gems, this is the place to look for gems. And then we'll start out by just saying we want to use this RSpec gem, and we can save that. And then over here, we can go ahead and do a bundle or a bundle install, but I'm just going to do bundle, so it'll do the same thing in this case. And you can see here it's installing RSpec and then some other dependencies. So it's getting this collection of tools for RSpec and then a couple other things here. So now, now what we want to do is do a bundle exec RSpec init. So what this is going to do is it's running RSpec's initializer within the context of this app. That's what a bundle exec is going to provide. So we'll just go ahead and run that. And you can see down below that created a .rspec file and a spec helper. You don't really need to worry too much about this, but this file is just telling RSpec to require spec helper, and spec helper is going to live inside spec. And that's just some configuration options for RSpec. Don't need to worry too much about that at this point. So now the next thing we're going to do is go ahead and set up a file structure. And this is kind of like the standard way to set this up. I mean, there's different ways you could do it if you wanted to, but I'm going to make a folder called lib, and that's going to contain our code. And I'm going to make the same folder to mirror that inside of spec. And it's pretty common to make folders inside of spec that mirror the folders kind of in the top level of your project, or if you had like an app folder, you might mirror all the folders inside of app within spec. So for our case, we're just going to make lib here for the actual code, the classes that we're writing, and then here's the one inside specs going to contain our specs. So now that we've got that set up, we can hop back over here, and we're going to add the tool that'll watch for changes. Actually, before we do that, we could probably just write something. So let's go ahead and make that giant robot class again. And then in here, we'll make a new file called giant robot spec.rb. And that's the convention, just adding that underscore spec suffix on the end. So now we've got our class here, and we've got the lib here. And at the top of this, we will do a require giant robot. Cool, and then we should be able to do describe giant robot. I'll just say it exists. We're basically just trying to do the most simple check to make sure that the class is there. So this is where we'll do that similar test where you say expect giant robot dot new dot to not. You can also do not to if you want. Raise error, and we will save that. And then down here, we're going to do bundle exec RSpec. And you want to give it the files you're interested in. So here we'll just do, we can just say all spec for now. Okay. So it's complaining because of this uninitialized constant giant robot. And that's because we haven't actually written a class yet for it. So let's just make a class called giant robot and have it not do anything. And then we'll run that again. And now it's passing. So here we've got our class and we've got a spec and we can run it and we can see that just by making that change that it's passing now. So the next step we're going to do is get it so that it can just run automatically every time we save. So we don't have to tell it which, we don't have to explicitly run the specs every time. We can kind of just keep coding and get. And the benefit of that is you want to get a really quick feedback loop when you're working on things, so that when you make a change, you can see everything's still passing, and then you can kind of move on and do the next thing. So in order to do that, we're going to hop back over here to our gem file, and we're going to add some more dependencies here. I'm just going to paste these in. So what this is saying is in our development environments and test environments, we want to include the guard gem, which is what's going to watch the file system for changes, and then guard RSpec, which is what knows how to actually the gem that knows how to actually have RSpec run when you want it to when there's changes. So we'll go ahead and save that, and we're going to hop back over here. We're going to bundle again, and we should see all that getting installed. Yep, and these are all the other dependencies of guard and guard RSpec being installed. And then we'll also want to do an initialization for guard. So we'll do bundle exec guard and then init RSpec. And we'll see that it'll create some files here. So it has added a guard file. And we can take a look at that and see what we have in here. Now, most of this we don't need. This by default is going to be set up for a like a Rails project, and I actually just want to copy and paste the setup that I have that's simpler from that directory we were looking at earlier. Let's see. Whoop. There we go. We'll just copy the contents of that guard file. And it looks like it's not giving it to me. Let me... Oh, oops. That's the one I already had open. This is the other one. Okay, here we go. So I'm just going to take the contents of this, much simpler. And then we'll just totally override this one. So what this is saying is when RSpec is triggered, we want to run bundle exec RSpec, and we're gonna look for changes in spec helper, and we're gonna look for changes in under the spec directory for just anything that ends in underscore spec.rb. So that would basically be any spec file we have. And then here we're going to be watching for any changes under the lib directory here, which is where we're putting our code for files that end in .rb. And there's a little more over here on the side. These are, I think, just the labels that get used for those. So anyway, with that change, we can go ahead and do fire off guard. So we'll do a bundle exec guard. And we should see guard. Yeah, so guard's running here now. So if we were to go make a change, if we just save this file, it should be enough. Yep. So now it's running with one example, and again running with another example. So we could do something like we could say we want robots to all have power level. So we could say, hey, we're going to describe this method called power, and let's see, what do we want to say? So the subject of this is going to be giant robot.new with power 5. And then we can say it has a power of 5. So here we're saying this is what we're talking about. This is the thing that we're going to be talking about when we say, when we're in these tests. So we can say expect subject dot power dot to equal 5. So we'll save that, and that'll fail because none of that code to support it's in place, but that's okay. Okay, so here it's complaining about the wrong number of arguments. We gave one argument and it was expecting 0, and we gave it this argument, but it's not set up to take an argument yet, so that's why it was complaining. So over here, we're going to add the initializer, which is just the method that will allow us to pass in information when we create a new instance. And we can, this is letting it know we're going to have a argument here called power, or key called power, and it should just default to 0. If I left that out, it would work too. One nice thing though about providing the default is it'll, for cases where we didn't provide something, those tests will continue to pass, and that code that use that will continue to work. So for now, I'm just going to go ahead and do that, and I'm going to say at power, which is just an instance variable for power, equals whatever was passed in. And then up here, we'll just make an attribute reader for power. So I don't need to worry too much about this. This is getting into the detail, some object-oriented stuff and details of Ruby, but more or less, we want to be able to make copies of a giant robot. We want to be able, when we do that, to say what the power level is, and then we need to hold on to that. So that's what that's doing. And then we also want to be able to ask a giant robot what its power is, and that's what this is doing. It's just setting up a method where we can look at that instance variable. And you could similarly, if you wanted to, just do def power that returns power. That's just the adder reader power is just a shorthand for that, macro for that. So we'll save this, and there we go. We've got 2 examples passing. So both of those tests are passing. Now we could say, you know what, even though we're passing in 5 as the power, it should really be end up being like 10 times that. And so we could say expect it to equal 50. And again, we got a failure. So we can hop back over here, and we could just in here say, we could do this a couple ways. We could just go ahead and handle it here when it's getting saved, so that it should be 10 times greater. Or we could say, you know what, it isn't, we're no longer really just returning the value that was passed in initially for power. We're making some changes to it, and we may actually want to hold on to the original. But since we have our since we have this behavior tested, we can just go ahead and approach this a different way and just make sure that the tests still pass, and that way we'll know what we did was right. So instead of adjusting it when we're saving it, we could just go down here and we could say return 10 times power, and then we'll get rid of this because the new method we wrote's going to take care of that. It's basically a custom reader. And then when we save that, we should see it works, and we can also prove that if you change it, it fails. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of the power of testing. You can get really quick feedback on when you've broken something, and then when you're ready to start changing the implementation of something, if you already have all the behaviors tested, it isn't a problem to just go in and change to a different implementation that makes more sense to you. And as your programs get bigger, that'll be more important, because one of the hardest problems in software engineering is figuring out how to make code maintainable and organize it in a way that's easy to understand, and there's a lot of other kind of best practices you can follow that are easier to do when you have good testing. I don't want to get too far into that in this video because this is already getting long enough. But yeah, thanks for joining me on this one. And like I said at the beginning, I've done some other videos on testing, so I recommend, if this is the first one you've watched, to go back and watch those. And I'll be doing more videos on kind of things to be thinking about or to be learning as you're working on becoming a better programmer and breaking into software engineering. So yeah, thanks for joining me, and I'll see you in the next one. If you're interested in seeing more videos like this, please click the subscribe button down below to be notified about new videos. Also, if you're interested in helping out the channel, I have links in the description to my Patreon page, as well as Amazon links to all the gear that I use to make these videos. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.